Hi, everybody. It's Miss Corbett here. It's a little afternoon on Wednesday, October 21st, and I've just finished reviewing all the work in Module 9, so it's time for a class notes video. In Module 9, we did a few different things, but we mainly focused on learning how to integrate sources. You did some reading and watched some videos on the process of doing quoting or summarizing or paraphrasing. You got some video activities through MindTap and some examples of how kind of looking at both where and when and why to quote, but also how to do it, how to paraphrase, those kinds of things. You took a video quiz on it, and then you did this conversation journal. I've been reading through everybody's journals, and I'm not able to respond to each one individually, but I did notice some points I want to discuss in this video that can also help explain how the grading broke down for those assignments in case you're wondering about that grade. So the biggest thing that I noticed we were struggling with was sandwiching quotes. And so I want to kind of go over again what that is and then show you some examples of what it looks like. So remember that sandwiching means that every time you include a quote, you're doing three things. Three separate steps are involved. First, you introduce the claim that you hope the quote proves or illustrates. So let's be very clear on this. That means you've got to have a claim you're wanting the quote to support, right? So that's our reminder that the quote is evidence. It's not able to make points on its own. So that's your first check as to whether you want to use it or not, is do you have a claim that this quote is supporting? If so, great. So then you introduce the claim. You say, this is the point I'm making, in slightly better words. Then you include the quote. Please remember that the quote gets quotation marks. If you're using a source's exact words, 100% of the time you put quotation marks around it. There's a lot about this stuff that's tricky, but that's not. You must include quotation marks around the exact words of a source. And then after the quote, you explain how the quote illustrates or supports the claim that you presented before the quote. Please note here that this is the explanation. This is like tying back together the logic. That's what you're doing here. You can think about these examples as if you were doing a rhetorical analysis. As we know, we just did those. We have those fresh on our minds. The way that might work in a rhetorical analysis is, let's say my claim is Tobias uses a lot of pathos to get parents to agree with her. That would be my claim, right? I'm saying she uses a lot of pathos. Then I'd include a quote that showed the pathos, right? But as we know, your reader may not immediately think that that quote proves what I said, right? If I'm saying Tobias used a lot of pathos to influence parents, I can include that quote, but I still have to do the work of explaining how it's pathos and why it's effective or ineffective, how it reaches parents. And that's what would come in the explanation part. So again, you want to make sure that it is supporting a claim and then that you can explain how it supports that claim. Please note that explanation sentences should not be a paraphrase of the quote. If you can paraphrase the quote effectively, you don't need to quote, right? Then you can just give us the main ideas in your own words, and we don't have to go to that guest speaker of the quote. The introduction and explanation should also not just be I agree with or I don't agree with, right? Because again, we're using it as evidence for something. So we've got to think about the quotes as evidence, and your sentences around them are how you use them to fit into your argument. It is not just saying I agree with them when they say this. If that's true, you can paraphrase. The reason we choose to quote is when the exact wording matters, and the sandwiching tells us why and how it does. So I grabbed a couple of examples from ones that you submitted this week, just a couple of them, though there were plenty that were good. The first one is from Marley Craig in section W03. She presents the claim. Another way that the article makes its point is by comparing the film's soundtrack side by side and other major albums as seen in the following quote. So now she's saying the film soundtrack side by side with other major albums, that's a thing they're doing to prove this point. Then we get the quote that shows they're doing that. And then we get an explanation afterwards. By reporting where these albums stand on the Billboard chart, it is evident that The Greatest Showman soundtrack has truly become a world favorite. right? It presents the claim, shows the evidence, explains why that evidence supports that claim. We get something similar with Taylor Bartos when it says, with this journey that these two men take across the nation, Zach still focuses on his main goal. And then we get, he's in search of this. This is the goal. That's from the quote. Then the quote shows the main reasoning behind their adventure overall, allowing for Zach to continue to watch and work for his goals. So again, we get a claim, we get evidence, we get the explanation of how the quote supports the claim. I really recommend thinking of this in a couple different ways. But the main one being, every time you use a quote, there should be two other sentences at least that surround it. Those sentences are not paraphrases or summaries. They are your own logic and your own writing that happen around the quote. Doing that will allow you to both develop your points more and use quotes effectively. Some other things I wanted to note when looking at these conversation journals. First of all, the formatting. I did ask you to do this italicizing and bolding and underlining. That was just for this assignment. That's not something you're going to do in the essays themselves. But the reason I asked you to do that is because I want you to be more intentional about these things. A lot of times when we're used to working with sources, we just kind of throw a quote in and we're not thinking about where is it? Are we doing it the way we want to be doing it, etc. So I required this formatting so that you would have to be conscious of, okay, here's where I'm sandwiching. Okay, here's where I'm paraphrasing. Because being more alert and more intentional with those things will help make them, more second nature for you over time. But please remember that that formatting will not be, appropriate for the essay itself. It was just for this journal. Please also remember that film titles come in italics. We will be talking more about how to format titles when we get into citation, but just for now, know that when you are using the title of the film, every time you use it, you put it in italics. Also, just a quick reminder, summaries are for main ideas. Paraphrases are the ones that include details. So if you are talking about the movie, if you're introducing the movie overall, or if you're introducing the main idea of a source, that's when you would use summary. Paraphrasing is more for specific places. We just want to remember kind of the purpose both those serve in the context of these essays. All right, so now let's look forward to what's coming next in Module 10. In Module 10, we're really going to be doing two things at once. First, we're going to be talking about plagiarism. In order to do that, we have an introduction video on it and some case studies that you'll look at and use for our discussion board. In the discussion board, you're going to read the case studies and choose one that you're going to address. Please make sure you include the number of your case study in the subject line, not just at the top of your posting, but in the subject line. And then you'll respond to other ones, other threads that address different case studies from the one you focused on. The purpose here is that we probably know plagiarism is bad. We're probably vaguely aware of what it is. We know that we shouldn't buy an essay off the internet that somebody else wrote. We know that's wrong. But plagiarism can get a lot trickier when we get into the specific kind of iterations, what it ends up looking like. And some of these might be more familiar than we'd like. So I want to go through those examples of what could be considered scholastic dishonesty. That's what you'll look at in the case studies and then weigh into on them in the discussion board. Then you'll also watch a video about evaluation essay structure. As we know, different purposes and different audiences require different approaches. And so we're going to talk about what goes into an evaluation essay. So you're going to see that with the video, and then you are going to submit an essay outline because we're going to be writing these essays before you know it. So as we did before with the rhetorical analysis, now you're going to be doing an outline for this essay. Remember also, as you're thinking about what's going to go into your evaluation essay, that evaluation writing, this has a couple things you have to do. You have to argue for and lay out and rank the criteria against which you'll be evaluating the text, and then you have to evaluate the text against those criteria. It might help to go back to that establishing the criteria discussion board we did a few weeks ago, where you came up with what makes a good first date, what makes good running shoes, what makes good breakfast foods, or whatever topic it was you chose. You had to lay out the criteria of what would make something good, and then you had to give me an example that fit that. Now, for this essay, you could evaluate your movie and decide that it's not a good example, but the same logical process holds. You're going to be laying out and ranking the criteria that you find important for this type of film, not just for a film, but for this type of film, an animation, a documentary, a superhero movie, a horror film, whatever it may be. And then you're going to evaluate your text against it. So that's a lot you have to do. And remember that in the outline, we want to be as specific as possible. The more specific your outline is, the easier it will be to write your draft of the essay. All right. I think that's all for now. As always, stop by the Ask Miss Corbett discussion board if you have questions, or drop me an email and we can talk more. All right. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. Bye.